In today's video, we're going to try to recreate a product that existed in a dream I had. The product was called Porridge toast, and it was bread just made from oats. So yeah, making bread from oats is not necessarily a new thing, but the thing that happened in my dream was this kind of viral trend where everybody was eating this stuff called porridge toast, and it was bread. It looked and sliced like a normal loaf of bread, but it was made from mostly oats, and the experience was toast for breakfast with jam and butter on it, but at the same time it was kind of porridge. Now oddly, this dream did have a recipe in it, or at least an outline for a recipe, and the idea was that this was bread made from oats instead of wheat, but the gluten had been added back in, because oats obviously don't contain gluten, at least not the same kind of gluten as wheat does. That's a reason why a lot of people use oat flour instead of wheat flour if they're sensitive to gluten. But today I'm going to try to recreate that. So what I've got here is the ingredients for, hopefully, porridge bread, which we will slice and make porridge toast. So a rundown of the ingredients: I've got 50 grams of rolled oats. I've got 150 grams of oat flour, 18 grams of oat bran, really just to make that up into the right amount, 32 grams of vital wheat gluten. So we're adding wheat gluten back into this to give it the structure. That together makes 250 grams. We're only going to make a half size loaf here. So that's 250 grams of dry. For the wet, we've got 150 ml of milk, which I will warm to sort of blood heat in the microwave. For the fat, normally I'd put a bit of oil in there, but I've got 10 grams of unsalted butter. And yeast, I've got 7 grams of fresh yeast. I brought this fresh yeast back from Spain. Actually, it's really good for making bread. It makes all the difference. One of these is enough for a kilo of flour, so a quarter of that is enough for this 250 gram dry mix. And there'll be a pinch of salt in there, which I've forgotten to weigh out, but that's going to be like 2 or 3 grams. So I've warmed this milk just for a few seconds in the microwave. It's the same temperature as my body now, and I'm just going to put the yeast in there to give that a start. You can crumble this yeast directly into the dry ingredients, but I tend to put it in the wet like that. Just let that soak in that milk while we get the dry ingredients going. So, rolled oats, oat bran, oat flour, vital wheat gluten, about 2 grams of salt. Obviously this is, the gluten's been separated out, so I don't know how this is likely to perform. I'm going to give it a really good mix to get that gluten well dispersed in amongst all of the oat stuff. My melted butter, I'll just give that a little mix in just so it doesn't solidify into one big chunk. And then a little whisk just to disperse that yeast. And in with the wet. I'm going to use the dough hooks on my hand mixer just because I find that a really effective way of mixing bread dough. And it is, after all, what these are for. Possibly a slightly small batch to be kneading with the dough hooks actually, so I might get that out and just knead it by hand. Gluten probably just needs a moment or two to hydrate properly. I'm just going to make sure I've got all of the dry stuff off the bottom. Make sure it's properly combined. And I don't want to add wheat flour to this apart from the gluten, so I'm going to not use this on a board. I'm going to just knead it in my hands here like this. Okay, I think that's probably enough kneading for now. That gluten needs to hydrate and work a little bit. So we'll cover that, leave it in a warm place for, I don't know, half an hour. See if it starts to do something. Okay, we've hit the first snag, which is that this dough is very hard. I'm assuming that just indicates that oats are more absorbent than wheat, and so the moisture's got locked up in the oats. Now, there's a couple of things I could do here. One is just to press ahead and prove and try to bake it at this consistency. I don't know that it's going to rise all that well. So I think what we need to do is probably add a bit of moisture. That's not typically very successful at this stage of mixing. Adding extra moisture into bread once it's mixed into a dough is usually tricky. Ask me how I know. That's why I measure carefully when I'm making bread, but of course this is an experiment. So I've got 25 grams of water here. We're going to try to add that much. And I think all I'll do is just make sure that that is immersed in the water. I'm just going to leave that to soak in, rather than try to massage that in and get it stuck all over my hands. We're just going to leave that for 10-15 minutes, see what happens. Okay, let's have a look and see what's going on. Well, it does look like it's risen a little bit, but it's still very firm, although that liquid hasn't really incorporated. This is part of the reason why I'm working with such a small batch, is I don't want to use up all my ingredients on the experimentation stage. I might get the dough hooks back in there if I think that's going to help. I think that still needs more water. So even though oats don't have gluten in them, they do have their own stickiness. So I think what might be happening here is we've got the stickiness of the oats and the stickiness of the gluten, causing it to set up into a really firm dough. So I think we're going to have another 25 grams of water in there. Okay, here we go then. So another 25 grams of water. And maybe slightly surprisingly, this does seem to be working now. So I think that's probably enough liquid. The dough feels a bit softer now. So questions you might be asking at this point maybe include, why are you even doing this? As always, I got an idea in my head, and the only way to get the idea out of my head and free up a bit of brain capacity is to do something about it. So I'm just trying to exorcise this idea from consuming my brain power. Why didn't I just go and Google a bread recipe that includes oats? Well, mainly because the idea was that this is a entirely oat except for the gluten recipe. I haven't even checked to see if anything like that exists already, because I just wanted to try to pursue the pure idea rather than somebody else's interpretation of a different idea. Anyway, I'm going to go and put that in the airing cupboard. That is the cupboard where the hot water tank lives. We're going to leave that for half an hour and see what happens. A little bit more than half an hour has elapsed, but something is happening. That dough is expanding. So, and I can actually tell that from experience of what the bowl sounds like when you knock on the bottom. Makes a sort of hollow sound. So, we have something that wants to be bread. I'm going to knock this back. That means just kneading it a bit more. I'm just going to test, actually, is that really... Yeah, it is doughy enough, I think. Yeah, knock that back. It's very sticky, because oats are sticky. I don't want to add any more dry flour here, though. So what I will do with this is we're going to get that straight into the tin and then prove it the rest of the way in the tin. So, cute little loaf tin. Tiny little drip of oil in there. And then the dough is just going to be formed into the right length for the tin. Squished into the... It's basically the approximate shape it needs to be. And then in like that. This would be a good way to monitor the rising now. So that's half filling that tin. I'm going to put that back in the airing cupboard to rise, and I'll know it's got to where it needs to be when it's just over the top of that tin. Just to stop that drying out, I'll just have that like that. And that, I will just give that as long as it needs to rise to the top of the tin. That could be several hours. Okay, I've given this several hours and it hasn't risen all that well. It has risen a bit, but probably only by about 25%. I don't think it's going to go any further. So I think now we'll just bake this anyway. Hopefully it will spring a little bit in the oven, and this will be experiment 1. I suspect I'm going to have to redo this with higher hydration to get a decent rise on it. So anyway, but we'll try baking this now and see what happens. Right, well, I've brushed the top with water as well, just in case that helps. Let's see what happens. I'll bake that for 30 minutes. All right, well, there it is. At least it came out okay. I was slightly fearful it might stick in the tin, but there it is. I mean, it looks like a loaf of bread, but it might be all right. I think it's going to be a bit heavy. Anyway, got to let that cool completely before we can even try to slice that. This is at about an hour to cool down. Shall we cut a slice? Actually, before we do, it's a brick. Okay. Well, a very fine and rather dense crumb. Let's cut a 8mm slice or something there. Okay. Well, it is bread. It's not what I had in mind. But it's got a crumb. It's not too crumbly though. So it is bread. I'll give it a taste. Surprisingly okay. It needs something. And that could be a little bit of butter. It's not horrible. It is definitely bread. It's very dense. I suspect when it's completely cool, like tomorrow, it will probably be stiff. So not a success, but also not a complete failure. And I think I know what I need to do now. The next version needs higher hydration, probably more rolled oats instead of oat flour. So it's a bit more porridgey, because we are trying to make porridge toast here. A little bit more salt, I think. Maybe also a tiny bit of sugar, just to help the yeast along. I'm going to try toasting a slice. Okay, well, it doesn't toast very well. It's burning on the crust and not really toasting very well on the crumb. It smells a bit sweeter, perhaps a little bit more porridgey. This is not right, but that toasted flavour does give me hope that porridge toast is actually a desirable goal. This particular iteration, though, just too hard on the crust. But I think I see the way forward. So tomorrow, I'm going to have another go, but you don't have to wait for tomorrow, because here that comes right now. It's the following day, and for our second attempt at making porridge toast, here are the adjustments I've made. So we've only got 120 grams of oat flour. That's a reduction of 30 grams. 75 grams of rolled oats. That's 25 grams more. 30 grams of oat bran. That's a little bit more. Only 25 grams of gluten. So previously my calculations were based on 13% gluten in the dry mix. This has gone down to 10% now, so a bit less gluten. Hopefully will give us a dough that's less like a rubber ball. Milk is now 225 grams. That's an increase of 75 grams. So we're now up to what bakers would call 90% hydration, which is similar to what you have for a ciabatta type of loaf. So the liquid is 90% of the weight of the dry mix. And then pretty much as before, 7 grams of yeast, 3 grams of salt, tiny bit more, 10 grams of sugar. That's a new addition, but hopefully that will make the yeast go whoosh, and 10 grams of butter. I'm going to mix slightly differently as well. So this time, my oat flour and my wheat gluten first. So my two most flour-like substances first. So I'm going to mix those really thoroughly to get that gluten incorporated with the oat flour. So this, in theory, hopefully means the gluten will be most closely associated with the finer grains. I don't know if that'll make a difference, but it just occurred to me that if we're trying to make oat flour behave more like wheat flour, then this is probably a sensible first step. Okay, now the other dry ingredients. Rolled oats, the oat bran, the salt. Whenever I put salt in a bread recipe, I get people saying, don't do that, it inhibits the yeast. But most bread recipes do have salt in them, and yeast is tolerant to a certain level of salt. I mean, it did fail last time, but that wasn't the reason for failure. And I think we might put the sugar. No, I was going to put the sugar in with the milk, but I think that might shock the yeast when it goes in there. So sugar can go in with the dry ingredients as well. And we'll just mix that through. Just going to go and warm up my milk a tiny bit. So yeah, just warming up to the temperature of my own body. Don't want that hot or else that will kill the yeast. The only reason for warming that up is just to take the chill of the fridge off it. And that will hopefully allow the yeast to get a bit more of a start. While that's soaking, I just need to go and melt that. So melted butter as well then. I'll just disperse that a little bit through the dry ingredients. Okay, there is one more change to the method, which is as soon as it's had its initial mix and knead, it's going to go straight in the tin. So I'm not going to do the kind of traditional two-stage prove and knock back method, because I think it just needs to go in there. It's quite a wet mix. Hopefully going to get a lively initial rise on it. I'm not looking for a particularly strong crumb texture because it's meant to be porridge toast. So crumbly is fine. So that yeast, just going to beat the yeast into the milk. And that all goes in there. And away we go. Now at this stage we've got what looks like porridge. That's very in keeping with the theme, and it does look like a lot of moisture in there, but we know that oats absorb a lot of moisture, so I think it's going to be okay. I'm just going to keep on mixing. I can feel it starting to thicken now, and we can see that that gluten is starting to work. It's starting to bring it together into a bit more of a clingy texture. I'm going to keep going. Okay, I think that's probably as mixed as it possibly needs to be. I'm now going to let that stand for 5 minutes. I'm expecting that that will stiffen up some more, and then it'll be ready to go in the tin. A few minutes have elapsed and it has stiffened up. It's starting to behave more like a wet dough than a porridge. So we can see there's just a little bit of it's clinging. I don't know how well you'll be able to discern that on camera, but it's behaving more like a very loose wet dough now than a batter, which is good. That's what I wanted. So I think one more little mix and then we'll get it in the tin. In fact, you can see the way it's interacting with the hooks here is different. I may have gone too far over the top with the hydration this time, and it might be that this is too wet. But you can see it is kind of a dough. It might be though that this is too wet to trap the gas bubbles. I'm hoping that what we won't have here is that the gases produced by the yeast just bubble out and rise to the top. I don't think they will, because it's quite claggy. Claggy being a positive attribute in this particular case. Yeah, I'll just get that down into the corners. Like that. As before, I'll cover that with a sheet of oiled plastic just to keep the moisture in and keep any foreign contaminants out. But this is a really wet batter and it might just kind of bubble up and spill over. So, just in case that happens, it's also going to go on a tray just to catch any spills. Okay, and then off to the airing cupboard. Okay, it's taken a little bit longer than I thought, but we've got, I don't know if you can see it, the dough is now level with the top of the tin. So I'm going to get downstairs, get that oven preheating, and we'll bake this. Right, it has doubled in size, which is what you always hope for with bread dough. So I'm being a little bit more careful than I would normally with bread dough because I don't want to knock this and find it collapses. So that's going to go now in the oven for probably 40 minutes at 200 degrees Celsius fan. But I'll check after 30. Okay, I'm pulling this at 35 minutes. Oddly, it's actually sunk down a little bit since it went in the oven. That's a surprise and a slight disappointment. I'm assuming that might be because there was a bit less gluten in this one, maybe less capacity to trap the gas and expand. But anyway, let's see what it looks like if we turn it out. A nicely coloured loaf, darker crust colour on this one, and that's more than likely to do with the sugar I put in there. I'm going to let that cool completely now before we try to slice it. I'm a little bit disappointed it sank like that, but it's not quite so much of a brick as the previous one. It's making me think, maybe I shouldn't be using yeast as the leavening here. Maybe I should be using baking powder and just get it straight in the oven and let it rise during the baking. Maybe. So there could be a version 3 coming. We'll see what version 2 tastes like first though. Well, here goes, moment of truth for this one. I have a feeling this might not be all that different. Oh, definitely a little bit more of a crumb texture in there. Okay. I'm going to cut another slice and put that in the toaster. So that one's, oh yeah, that's definitely more bready and also more porridgey. So that one's in the toaster while we have a taste of this one. Definitely more crumbly. Well, here goes. Much better. It is bread, but it's also, in a weird way, very porridge-like. It's very breakfasty porridge-like. I think we might have done it. We've still got a problem with it toasting. It burns on the crust before the crumb is properly toasted. Anyway, bit of butter on there. Just let that soften in the heat of the toast. Purple jam. The best colour. And yeah, this is part of the thing that was happening. No, Eva, in a minute. This is part of the thing that was happening in the porridge toast in my dream, is that it was only just holding together. It was kind of like, it is toast, but it's also porridge. Okay, let's just place that there, I think, shall we? Yeah, I think that shot there could be the thumbnail. So, let us taste porridge toast. I suppose I should have tasted a little bit that wasn't without the jam first. Now it's been toasted. Yeah, I think that's it. I think that is it. That's porridge toast. Now, I think there's probably room for improvement on this, but that's pretty much where I wanted to get to for this part. I reckon I might at some point try making this as a soda bread instead of a yeasted bread, but I'm happy with what that is, which is basically a very crumbly, oaty, porridgey bread. I would have liked it to toast a bit more evenly, but you can't have everything. But we do need to do the toast tax. Okay, sit. Give me a little paw. Come on, try harder. Good girl. What do you think of porridge toast, Eva? Good? Okay, that's it. You may go. So just a couple of further reflections on this porridge toast. The recipe, by the way, is on the screen here and will be in the text of the video description. Just a little bit of sugar in there I think really helped with the overall flavour. But yeah, a couple of slices of this filled me up for hours. I mean, porridge is well known for doing that. So it's not quite lembas bread, but it's, you know, perhaps the closest we can get in reality. And there is something particularly nice about the way it comes apart. And the texture still includes whole oat flakes sort of coming out of it, like if you'd eaten a spoonful of porridge. But yeah, so this is essentially portable porridge. I'm actually a little bit surprised, but also happy that we got to this in just 2 tries. So there we go. That was porridge toast. Literally a dream come true. For me, at least, anyway. I hope that's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.